Welcome to Buddha's Healing, a gentle space where we reflect on the wisdom of the Buddha and learn how to live with greater peace, clarity, and compassion in everyday life. Dear friends, there comes a quiet season in life that many people do not talk about enough. It often begins sometime after 50, not suddenly, not all at once, but quietly, almost invisibly. You wake up one morning and notice that your energy feels different. Your body takes a little longer to recover. Sleep does not come as easily, stress feels heavier than before, and sometimes, even though life may finally be more stable than it used to be, something inside still feels tired. Very tired. Many people assume this is simply aging. This is what happens after 50, they say. My body is getting older. My energy isn't what it used to be. And yes, aging is natural. The Buddha never taught us to fear growing older. He reminded us that life itself moves through seasons. Youth changes, strength changes, the body changes. Everything in this world changes. This is the truth of impermanence. But here is something very important to understand. Not every form of exhaustion comes from age. Not every decline in health comes from the body alone. Sometimes, the body is carrying the weight of what the heart has been holding for years, and this is something many people overlook. Especially after 50, because after 50, people are not only carrying responsibilities anymore. They are carrying memories, regrets, wounds, unspoken grief, old disappointments, fears about the future. Worries about children, worries about health, loneliness that nobody sees, and sometimes, a quiet sadness that is difficult to explain. Have you ever looked at someone who seems fine on the outside, yet something about them feels heavy? Their smile is there, but their spirit feels tired. Their body is present, but their peace feels missing. Perhaps you have felt this way too. Maybe you smile in front of others. Maybe you continue showing up, taking care of family, managing responsibilities, doing what needs to be done, yet deep inside, you feel emotionally exhausted. Not because one terrible thing happened, but because life has slowly become heavy, little by little. Thought by thought, burden by burden, and the truth is, the heart keeps score. The body remembers what the mind refuses to release. Many people spend years trying to heal the body, taking medications, changing diets, trying supplements, searching for answers, and none of those things are wrong. Caring for health matters deeply. The body deserves kindness. But sometimes, we focus so much on fixing the symptoms that we forget to ask a much deeper question. What has my heart been carrying all these years? What emotional weight have I never truly released? What pain have I learned to live with instead of healing? Because, dear friends, the body speaks, even when the mouth stays silent. Anxiety speaks through sleepless nights. Stress speaks through tension in the shoulders. Loneliness speaks through exhaustion. Unresolved anger speaks through heaviness. Fear speaks through restlessness. Grief speaks through tiredness that sleep cannot fix. And often, what we call aging is sometimes emotional exhaustion that has quietly accumulated for decades. The Buddha taught that suffering does not appear without causes. Nothing simply happens by accident. Just as a tree does not suddenly wither overnight, the spirit does not become weary overnight either. A person rarely wakes up one day completely overwhelmed. Usually, it builds slowly, years of carrying too much, years of overthinking, years of never allowing the heart to rest, years of trying to be strong, years of pretending everything is okay. And eventually, the body begins whispering, "Please slow down, please listen, please take care of me." Sometimes those whispers become louder. High blood pressure, fatigue, anxiety, poor sleep, digestive issues, emotional burnout, a constant feeling of heaviness, and yet, many people continue pushing through, especially in American culture, because so many people have been taught to keep going, to stay productive, to remain strong, to solve every problem, to never slow down. But dear friends, healing does not always come from doing more. Sometimes healing begins when we finally stop, pause, breathe, and listen to what our inner world has been trying to tell us. After 50, life changes in ways that can feel deeply emotional. Children grow up, parents become older or pass away. Friendships shift, retirement begins to appear on the horizon, the body changes, relationships change. Dreams sometimes change, and somewhere inside, many people quietly begin asking difficult questions. Did I live the life I wanted? Did I spend too much time worrying? Why do I still feel unsettled? Why do I feel lonely even around people? Why am I so tired? Sometimes those questions are painful, but they are also sacred because they invite us into something deeper. Awareness, reflection, healing. The Buddha taught that suffering becomes lighter when we stop running from it and begin understanding it. Not judging ourselves, not blaming ourselves, simply noticing, gently, honestly, compassionately, because, dear friends, many people over 50 are not just physically tired, they are emotionally tired, tired from carrying expectations, tired from carrying family burdens, tired from unresolved disappointments, tired from worrying about everyone else, tired from trying to control things they cannot control, and often, they forget one very important thing: to care for themselves with compassion. Perhaps nobody ever taught them how. Perhaps survival always came first. Perhaps responsibility always mattered more. But now, maybe this season of life is asking something new. Not more pressure, not more guilt, but gentleness. Maybe this chapter of life is not about becoming harder. Maybe it is about becoming softer, kinder to yourself, more forgiving, more present, more peaceful. Today, we are going to reflect deeply on 5 emotional patterns many people over 50 quietly carry in their hearts, patterns that may slowly affect emotional well-being, inner peace, and even physical health more than they realize. Not to create fear, not to create shame, but to create awareness, because awareness is where healing begins. We will gently explore things such as holding on to worry, carrying resentment for too long, living with loneliness in silence, holding on to regrets, and struggling to let go of control. Perhaps as we talk today, you may recognize parts of yourself. And if you do, please be gentle with yourself. This is not about blame. This is about understanding. This is about learning to set down what has become too heavy. Because one of the deepest forms of wisdom the Buddha offered was not perfection, it was compassion. Compassion for others and compassion for ourselves, dear friends. There comes a moment in life when healing no longer looks like fixing everything. Sometimes healing looks like letting go. Sometimes healing looks like breathing deeper, sleeping softer, forgiving more, carrying less. Sometimes healing looks like finally saying, I have been hard on myself for too long. I deserve peace too. I do not need to carry everything anymore. And perhaps that moment can begin today. So before we continue, take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and gently ask yourself, what has my heart been holding for too long? Because sometimes the thing quietly draining our health is not what we eat, not our age, not time itself, but the invisible emotional weight we never learn to put down. Let us begin with something very honest. Growing older can be a strange experience. When we are younger, We often believe exhaustion comes from hard work. We think stress belongs to busy years. We imagine that once life slows down, peace will naturally arrive. But for many people after 50, that is not exactly what happens. Sometimes life becomes quieter. Yet the mind becomes louder. The responsibilities may change, but emotional weight remains. Children grow older. Yet worry does not disappear. Work may become lighter, yet anxiety still lingers. The house may become quieter. Yet loneliness grows louder, and this surprises many people, because from the outside, life may finally look stable. Yet inwardly, something still feels unsettled. Have you ever noticed how some people over 50 seem deeply peaceful? Their energy feels calm. Their smile feels sincere. Even in hardship, there is a softness about them. And then there are others who seem constantly tired, quickly irritated, emotionally overwhelmed, always worried, always carrying something heavy inside. What creates the difference? Is it luck, money, good genetics? Sometimes those things matter, but often, the deeper difference lives inside the heart. Because the emotional habits we carry become the emotional atmosphere we live in, and over time, that emotional atmosphere affects not only the mind, but also the body. If fear lives inside long enough, the nervous system becomes exhausted. If resentment stays too long, peace slowly disappears. If worry never rests, sleep becomes fragile. If loneliness is buried in silence, the spirit begins to ache. The Buddha taught that the mind shapes experience. And this truth becomes especially important as we grow older, because after 50, people often begin harvesting what has quietly been planted inside for years. Habits of peace bring peace. Habits of fear bring fear. Habits of gratitude bring softness. Habits of bitterness bring heaviness. Dear friends, this is not punishment. This is not karma in the fearful sense many people imagine. This is simply cause and effect. Inner habits create inner conditions, and inner conditions slowly shape how we experience life. That is why today's conversation matters so deeply, because many people spend years caring for everyone else, while forgetting to care for the emotional life inside themselves. Many people know how to survive, but very few people know how to rest emotionally, and emotional exhaustion is real, perhaps even more real than physical exhaustion. Because physical tiredness may disappear after sleep, but emotional heaviness can quietly follow us for years. You may know this feeling. You sleep, yet still feel tired. You sit down to rest, yet your mind keeps running. You try to relax, yet tension remains in the chest. Something feels heavy, but you cannot fully explain why. Dear friends, sometimes the body is not asking for more medication. Sometimes it is asking for emotional gentleness, for slowness, for forgiveness, for space to breathe. And so today, we begin with the first emotional pattern many people over 50 quietly carry in their hearts. A pattern so common that most people no longer notice it, yet it slowly steals energy, interrupts sleep, creates anxiety, and quietly weakens peace. That emotional habit is constant worrying. The Buddha taught something deeply compassionate. Much of human suffering comes not from what is happening, but from what the mind continues creating. Fear, imagined outcomes, unfinished stories, worries about tomorrow. The mind becomes restless, and a restless mind struggles to find peace. Many people believe worrying means caring. If I stop worrying, maybe something bad will happen. If I worry, at least I am being responsible. But dear friends, worry rarely protects peace. Most of the time, it quietly steals it. The Buddha reminded us again and again, the past has already gone, the future has not yet arrived. This moment is the only moment truly available to us, and yet, how often do we actually live here? Many people sit at dinner while mentally living in tomorrow. They lie in bed while mentally replaying yesterday. They spend today fearing a future that may never arrive, and slowly, the heart becomes tired if you pay close attention. Many people over 50 are carrying invisible fear. Fear of illness, fear of aging, fear of loneliness, fear for their children, fear of financial uncertainty, fear of becoming dependent, fear of losing people they love. And these fears are understandable, very understandable. Please do not judge yourself for having them. You are human, but here is the gentle truth. Fear becomes harmful when it never leaves, when worry becomes a permanent guest in the mind. The body begins paying the price. Shoulders tighten, sleep becomes lighter, digestion changes, energy drops. Joy becomes harder to access, patience grows thinner. Sometimes people say, "I don't know why I feel so tired all the time." But deep inside, their nervous system has been carrying emotional tension for years. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every single day. At first, perhaps you manage, but eventually, even standing feels exhausting. Worry works the same way. At first, it feels manageable. Then gradually, it becomes emotional weight, and emotional weight eventually becomes physical heaviness. Dear friends, this does not mean we stop caring. It simply means we learn the difference between caring and carrying too much. Caring says, "I will do my best." Worry says, "I must control everything." Caring says, "I love my family." Worry says, "I must suffer for every possible future." Caring is gentle. Worry is exhausting, perhaps this evening. Before sleep, you may place your hand over your heart for a moment, take one slow breath, and quietly whisper, "I do not need to solve tomorrow tonight. I have carried enough for one day. I deserve rest too, sometimes." Healing begins with words this simple, sometimes. Peace begins the moment we stop carrying what does not belong to today. There was a man named Robert. He was 63 years old. If you met him at first glance, you might have thought he had a good life. He lived in a quiet suburb outside Denver. He had worked hard for decades, raised 2 children, paid off most of the mortgage, retired from a stable job. On paper, everything looked fine, but inside, Robert was tired, very tired. Not physically at first, emotionally, though he rarely admitted it. You see, Robert had spent most of his life worrying. He worried when his children were young. He worried about bills. He worried about mistakes. He worried about the future. And strangely, even after retirement, the worrying never stopped. In some ways, it became worse. Every morning, he would sit at the kitchen table with coffee in hand and immediately begin thinking, what if his retirement savings were not enough? What if inflation became worse? What if he got sick? What if something happened to his wife, Susan? What if his daughter lost her job? What if his son's marriage did not work out? His mind never rested. Even during calm moments, even during family dinners, even while sitting outside on beautiful afternoons. His body would be there, but his mind always somewhere else, always in tomorrow, always preparing for disaster. At night, sleep became difficult. He would lie in bed staring into darkness. His wife would quietly whisper, "Robert, you should try to sleep." He would sigh, "I am trying," but he wasn't really resting. His body was lying down. Yet his mind was still running, running through numbers, problems, imagined futures, worst-case scenarios. Eventually, the exhaustion started showing up physically, tightness in his chest, frequent headaches, high blood pressure, restlessness, short temper. Even small inconveniences bothered him. One afternoon, His grandson accidentally spilled juice across the dining table. The little boy froze. Robert snapped immediately. "Can't you be more careful?" The room fell quiet. The child looked embarrassed. His daughter gently said, "Daddy's just a kid." Later that evening, Robert sat alone in the backyard. The guilt sat heavily inside him. He remembered the look on his grandson's face, and suddenly, something inside hurt, not anger, sadness. Deep sadness. He realized something difficult. He was becoming emotionally tired in ways he never expected. Not because life was terrible, but because fear had quietly become his lifestyle. A few weeks later, during a routine doctor's appointment, his physician asked gently, "How's stress these days?" Robert laughed softly. "At my age, stress just comes with life." The doctor paused, then said something unexpected. "Stress may come with life, but carrying it every single day is optional." Robert looked down. The doctor continued, "Your body is asking for rest. Not just physical rest, mental rest, emotional rest." Those words stayed with him. A month later, Susan invited him to attend a mindfulness class at a local Buddhist center. At first, he resisted. "That kind of thing isn't tea for me," he said, but eventually, he agreed, mostly to make her happy. The room was quiet. Simple, nothing dramatic, just soft lighting, stillness, and an older teacher speaking gently. At one point, the teacher said, "Many people spend their whole lives preparing for storms that never arrive." Robert felt something shift. Then came another sentence. "Worry feels responsible until it becomes suffering, for reasons he could not explain." His eyes filled with tears, because for the first time in years, someone had described exactly how he felt. The teacher continued, "Peace is not found when life becomes predictable. Peace begins when we stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world." That sentence stayed with him. Deeply, slowly, Robert began changing small things, not perfectly, not overnight, just gently. He started taking slow morning walks. Without podcasts, without news, just silence, breathing, trees, sky. He began writing worries in a notebook before bed, and telling himself, "Tomorrow can wait." When anxious thoughts arrived, he paused, breathed, and quietly repeated, "This moment is enough." Little by little, something softened, sleep improved, his patience returned. His chest felt lighter. Even Susan noticed. One evening she smiled and said, "You seem different lately." Robert laughed softly. "Maybe I finally got tired of scaring myself." Months later, his grandson spilled juice again during dinner. Everyone froze, waiting. Robert looked down, then smiled gently. "Well," he said warmly, "looks like Grandpa gets to practice patience tonight." The room burst into laughter, and for the first time in a long time, Robert laughed too, really laughed. Not because life had become perfect, but because he had stopped letting fear steal the present moment. Dear friends, perhaps part of Robert's story feels familiar, because many people quietly live this way. Always preparing, always bracing for problems, always carrying tomorrow before it arrives, and yet, most of what we fear never happens exactly as imagined, but the emotional burden of fear, that part becomes very real. Please hear this gently. Worry is not proof of love. Worry is not proof of responsibility, sometimes. Worry is simply exhaustion wearing the mask of caring. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to trust this moment. You are allowed to stop carrying every possible future all at once. After 50, life is not asking you to control everything. Perhaps life is inviting you into something wiser, something softer, something calmer, to breathe more deeply, to release what has become too heavy, to finally understand. Peace does not come from certainty. Peace comes from learning to stay present in uncertainty. If today's reflection speaks to your heart, please subscribe to Buddhist Healing and join us as we learn to care for both body and spirit with greater compassion. And if worry has quietly followed you through life, perhaps leave a gentle comment below. You may discover you are far from alone on this healing journey. Dear friends, there is something many people carry quietly after 50, something that rarely gets spoken about openly. Something invisible, yet deeply heavy, and that is resentment, unhealed disappointment, old hurt, lingering anger. Pain that was never fully released. Sometimes it comes from family, a difficult marriage, a painful divorce. Words spoken years ago that still echo inside. Sometimes it comes from children, a phone call that never came. Distance that slowly appeared, moments of feeling forgotten. Sometimes it comes from siblings, old wounds, old unfairness, unfinished hurt, and sometimes the deepest resentment is toward life itself. This wasn't how I imagined things would turn out. I gave so much. Why did life become this difficult? Why did people hurt me this way? Dear friends, these questions are deeply human. Please do not judge yourself for having them. Because pain is real, disappointment is real, loss is real. But here is the quiet truth many people discover too late. Pain hurts, but holding on to pain for too long hurts even more. The Buddha taught that anger is like holding a burning coal, with the intention of throwing it at someone else. Before it reaches another person, it burns the one holding it, and resentment works the same way. At first, it feels justified. Someone hurt us, someone disappointed us, someone betrayed trust, someone failed us. Of course the heart reacts, of course emotions rise, but over time, something subtle begins happening. The pain no longer belongs to the original moment. It becomes part of daily life, a heaviness, a bitterness, a tension that quietly lives in the body. Have you ever noticed how difficult it feels to fully relax when the heart is still angry? How hard it is to sleep peacefully after carrying emotional hurt? How resentment quietly steals joy from ordinary moments? Dear friends, sometimes the body becomes tired not from work, but from emotional resistance. From carrying emotional stories that were never allowed to rest. The truth is, unhealed resentment becomes exhausting. Not only emotionally, but physically too, because the body listens to emotional stress. A tense heart creates tension in the body. Unspoken anger creates restlessness. Emotional bitterness quietly drains energy, and after 50, many people begin feeling the emotional cost more deeply. What once felt manageable now feels heavy. Because the body no longer hides emotional exhaustion the same way it once did. Perhaps this is why some people grow softer with age, and others grow harder. Some become gentler, others become bitter. Some grow wiser, others become trapped inside old stories. The difference is not always circumstance. Sometimes, the difference is what they chose to carry and what they finally decided to release. Today, we gently reflect on the second emotional burden that quietly affects health after 50, holding on to resentment for too long. Not because forgiveness is easy, not because pain should be ignored, but because peace matters too. And at some point, we must ask ourselves, how much longer do I want to carry this? The Buddha taught again and again that attachment creates suffering, and emotional attachment to pain may be one of the hardest forms to release. Many people think forgiveness means pretending nothing happened. It does not. Some think forgiveness means excusing harmful behavior. It does not. Forgiveness is something quieter, something wiser. It simply means I no longer want this pain controlling my peace, because, dear friends, holding resentment often hurts us more than the person who caused the pain. Sometimes the other person has moved on, forgotten, changed, or perhaps never even understood the depth of what happened. Meanwhile, we continue replaying the story. Again and again and again, the Buddha reminded us that clinging creates suffering, and sometimes the hardest things to stop clinging to are emotional wounds. The mind returns to them, revisits them, feeds them, protects them, because strangely enough, pain can become familiar, even identity. This is what happened to me. This is who hurt me. This is why I struggle, and slowly, the hurt becomes home. But dear friends, what if healing asks us to leave that emotional home behind? What if peace asks us to stop reopening the wound? If you listen carefully to older conversations, you will sometimes notice something. Some people speak mostly about gratitude. Others speak mostly about pain. Some people tell stories about love. Others repeat old disappointments. Again and again, and eventually, the emotional atmosphere they live in becomes their emotional reality. This is not blame. This is simply awareness. The stories we repeat shape the emotions we strengthen. And emotions repeated long enough shape our nervous system. Resentment often looks like this: replaying arguments, imagining what should have been said, reliving betrayal, holding grudges, keeping score, quiet bitterness, emotional distance, and perhaps the hardest one of all, the inability to let the past stay in the past. Dear friends, sometimes healing begins with a very gentle truth. You can honor your pain without living inside it forever. You do not have to deny what happened. You do not have to minimize it, but perhaps you no longer need to carry it everywhere. Sometimes forgiveness is not for them. Sometimes forgiveness is medicine for your own nervous system, for your own peace, for your own sleep, for your own heart. And perhaps tonight, you might ask yourself gently, what old pain have I been carrying for too long? Has this resentment protected me or only exhausted me? Sometimes, the deepest healing begins with questions we finally become brave enough to ask ourselves. There was a woman named Margaret. She was 68 years old, living alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland. From the outside, Margaret looked composed, responsible, independent, the kind of woman people described as strong. She kept a beautiful garden, paid her bills on time, volunteered at church twice a month, smiled politely at neighbors, and always said, "I am doing just fine." But the truth, Margaret had been carrying something heavy for almost 20 years. Resentment, deep resentment, toward her younger sister Linda. The pain began after their mother passed away. At first it was something small, or at least, something that looked small from the outside: arguments about inheritance, misunderstandings about responsibilities, unspoken disappointments, words said in grief that landed too hard. Neither sister truly meant to hurt the other, but grief has a strange way of turning pain into anger, and anger into distance. One painful conversation became silence, silence became months, months became years. Eventually, the relationship disappeared. No birthday calls, no holidays together, no family dinners. Nothing. At first, Margaret told herself she did not care. She made her choice. I don't need people who treat me like that. If she wanted to fix things, she would. These sentences became familiar, comforting almost, like emotional armor. But something else quietly happened too. The bitterness stayed, long after the argument itself had passed. Whenever someone mentioned family, Margaret felt tension rise. Whenever she saw sisters laughing in grocery stores, something inside tightened. At night, thoughts returned, old conversations replayed, things she wished she had said. Things she wished Linda had apologized for. Sometimes she imagined reunions. Sometimes she imagined arguments. But most nights, she simply lay awake, heavy, emotionally tired and increasingly lonely over time. Her health began changing too. Nothing dramatic, just subtle things: poor sleep, low energy, headaches, tightness in the chest, a sadness she could never fully explain. One afternoon during a doctor's visit, her physician asked, "How have you been emotionally?" Margaret laughed politely. "Oh, I am fine," but something about the question lingered. Emotionally, how had she been emotionally? The truth, not fine, not for a very long time. A few weeks later, one of her neighbors invited her to a mindfulness discussion group at a local Buddhist center. Normally, she would have said no, but loneliness has a way of making us say yes to unexpected things. The teacher that evening was gentle, soft-spoken, nothing dramatic, no preaching, just calm reflection. At one point he said something that made Margaret sit up straighter. "Sometimes we continue suffering long after the painful event has ended." The room grew quiet. Then he continued, "Not because the pain is still happening, but because we continue carrying it." Margaret felt tears rise unexpectedly. The teacher looked around the room and said, "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean saying the hurt was acceptable. Forgiveness simply means you no longer want pain to rent space in your heart." That sentence stayed with her. For days, then weeks, pain renting space in her heart. Was that what had happened? Had resentment quietly moved in and made itself at home? That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table for a long time. No television, no distractions, just silence and memory. She realized something difficult. The argument with Linda had lasted one afternoon, but emotionally, she had relived it for 20 years. 20 years, and suddenly, she felt tired, not angry, just tired. Tired of carrying it, tired of replaying it, tired of letting one painful chapter shape so much of her emotional life. A week later, she found herself standing in a greeting card aisle, not entirely sure why. Eventually, she bought a simple card, nothing dramatic, just flowers on the front. At home. She sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour before writing. Not perfectly, not poetically, just honestly. She wrote, "Linda, I don't even know where to begin. I think we both got hurt. And maybe we both stayed hurt for too long. I don't know what happens next, but I miss my sister." She almost didn't send it. Twice she nearly threw it away. But eventually, she mailed it. Days passed, then weeks. No reply. Part of her felt foolish, part of her regretted trying. But strangely, something still felt lighter, because for the first time in years, she had stopped fighting inside herself. 3 weeks later, her phone rang, unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then came a voice she had not heard in nearly 2 decades. Quiet shaking, "Margaret," silence, then tears on both sides. No dramatic movie moment, no perfect apology. Just honesty, grief, awkwardness, tenderness, and something else. Relief. Months later, things still were not perfect. Healing rarely happens all at once, but phone calls returned, birthdays returned, laughter returned. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Margaret felt healthier, she slept better, her shoulders relaxed. Her sadness softened, her laughter became easier. One afternoon, while watering flowers, she suddenly realized. Peace had not arrived because life became perfect. Peace arrived because she finally stopped carrying old pain everywhere she went. Dear friends, perhaps there is a Margaret somewhere inside many of us, an old hurt, a heavy disappointment. A story we keep replaying, a person we cannot stop thinking about. Maybe someone hurt you deeply. Maybe life disappointed you. Maybe trust was broken. Please hear this gently. Your pain matters, your experience matters, but so does your peace. And sometimes, the most compassionate thing we can do for ourselves is ask, am I ready to stop carrying this every day? Not because what happened was okay, but because your nervous system deserves rest. Your heart deserves peace. Your future deserves more space than your past. You do not have to forgive overnight. Healing is slow, tender, human, but perhaps today can be the day you stop feeding the wound and start feeding peace instead. There is another quiet burden many people carry after 50, one that often stays hidden, invisible to others, yet deeply painful, and that burden is loneliness. Not always physical loneliness, not simply living alone, but emotional loneliness. The feeling of no longer being deeply understood, the feeling of becoming invisible, the feeling that somehow life has grown quieter in ways the heart did not expect. This kind of loneliness can happen even in a crowded room, even inside a marriage, even surrounded by family. Because loneliness is not always about the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of emotional connection, the absence of feeling truly seen, truly heard, truly understood. After 50, many people quietly experience this. Children become busy with their own lives, careers change, friendships shift, parents pass away, communities become smaller. Social circles slowly shrink, and sometimes, without warning, life becomes quieter, too quiet. The house that once felt full suddenly feels empty. The dinner table grows smaller. Phone calls happen less often. Weekends feel longer, and a strange ache begins settling into the heart, an ache that many people never talk about. Because loneliness feels difficult to admit, especially in a culture that values independence, many people tell themselves, I should be fine. I shouldn't need anyone. Other people have bigger problems, so instead of speaking honestly, they stay silent, they smile politely, keep busy, watch television, scroll endlessly, distract themselves. But deep inside, something still hurts. Dear friends, loneliness is not weakness. It is deeply human. We were never meant to carry life entirely alone. The Buddha often emphasized the importance of compassionate community, of spiritual friendship, of kindness, of human connection, because healing becomes harder in isolation. Suffering feels heavier when no one witnesses it, and after 50, unspoken loneliness can quietly begin affecting emotional and physical well-being. Sleep becomes more fragile. Motivation fades, energy lowers, anxiety rises, joy becomes harder to access, even the body can begin feeling heavier. And yet, many people never realize loneliness may be part of what they are feeling. They simply say, I don't feel like myself anymore. I am tired all the time. Nothing feels exciting. I don't know what's wrong with me. Perhaps nothing is wrong with you. Perhaps your heart is simply longing for connection, for warmth, for companionship, for understanding, and there is no shame in that. Today, we gently explore the third emotional burden many people over 50 quietly carry: loneliness hidden behind strength. Because, dear friends, sometimes the people who seem strongest are quietly carrying the deepest ache. The Buddha taught that all beings are interconnected. No life exists entirely alone. No heart thrives in complete isolation. And yet, many people spend years pretending loneliness does not affect them, especially after loss, after divorce, after retirement, after children move away, after grief changes the structure of everyday life. Some people slowly stop reaching out. They tell themselves, people are busy. I don't want to bother anyone. No one really understands, and over time, silence becomes familiar, loneliness becomes routine, the heart grows quieter. But not more peaceful, just more alone. Dear friends, there is a difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude can nourish peace. Loneliness quietly drains it. Solitude feels chosen. Loneliness feels abandoned. Solitude restores energy. Loneliness slowly weakens it. And often, the most painful loneliness comes not from being physically alone, but emotionally disconnected, feeling unseen, feeling forgotten, feeling like nobody truly asks, "How are you really?" The Buddha reminded us that compassion matters deeply, not only compassion for others, but compassion toward ourselves. And self-compassion sometimes means admitting something vulnerable. I feel lonely, not broken, not weak, not failing, simply human. If you listen carefully to many people after 50, you may notice something. Some have stopped sharing how they truly feel, not because they have nothing to say, but because they stopped believing anyone wanted to hear it. Perhaps they were disappointed too many times. Perhaps they learned to stay strong. Perhaps grief made words harder, and slowly, they became emotionally quiet. But dear friends, pain carried silently often becomes heavier. The heart still longs to be known, to laugh, to belong, to feel emotionally safe. And loneliness has a strange way of making even ordinary days feel heavier. Meals feel quieter, evenings feel longer, small problems feel bigger, hope feels farther away. The truth is, human beings heal in connection. Sometimes healing comes through friendship, sometimes through community, sometimes through spiritual practice, sometimes through simply hearing, "You are not alone," perhaps tonight. You might ask yourself gently, have I been feeling lonely in ways I never fully admitted? Have I been trying to stay strong while quietly hurting? And perhaps most importantly, what small act of connection could I offer myself this week? Sometimes healing begins not with dramatic change, but with one honest conversation, one returned phone call, one shared cup of coffee, one moment of courage, one small step back toward connection. Dear friends, as we come to the end of today's reflection, perhaps the most important thing to remember is this: growing older is not only a physical journey, it is an emotional journey too. After 50, the body begins speaking more honestly. The things we once ignored become harder to ignore. Stress feels heavier. Sleep feels more fragile. Energy shifts. Emotions linger longer. And many people quietly wonder, why do I feel so tired? Why does peace feel harder to find? Why does my heart feel heavier than before? Sometimes, the answer is not only in the body. Sometimes, the answer lives quietly inside the heart. Today, we reflected on emotional burdens many people over 50 carry without fully realizing it. Worry, resentment, loneliness, invisible emotional habits that quietly grow heavier over time, not because anyone is weak, not because life was lived wrongly, but because being human is hard. Life asks much from us: responsibility, loss, change, heartbreak, sacrifice, disappointment, grief, and somehow, many people learn how to survive all of it. But very few people learn how to gently put the emotional weight down. Dear friends, perhaps healing after 50 is not about becoming younger again. Perhaps healing is becoming lighter. Lighter in spirit, lighter in expectation, lighter in the stories we keep repeating, lighter in the pain we continue carrying. The Buddha reminded us again and again, suffering becomes deeper when we cling too tightly, not because attachment makes us bad people, but because clinging keeps the heart tense, tired, afraid, heavy, and maybe, This season of life is gently inviting you into something new. Not more pressure, not more perfection, not more control, but softness, stillness, compassion. Perhaps this chapter is asking, can you forgive a little more? Can you worry a little less? Can you stop being so hard on yourself? Can you allow yourself rest? Can you stop carrying everything alone? Dear friends, you have already carried so much. More than many people know, you have survived difficult seasons, disappointments, losses, unexpected turns. You have stayed strong for family, worked hard, sacrificed, kept going even when life felt overwhelming. And maybe now, you deserve gentleness too. You deserve moments of peace, moments of quiet, moments where you are not solving problems, not carrying everyone else's fears, not preparing for tomorrow, just breathing, just being, just allowing yourself to rest. Because healing sometimes begins in surprisingly simple ways. A slower morning, a deeper breath, a quiet walk, a moment of prayer, a few minutes of mindfulness, a gentle conversation, an honest tear, a forgiving heart, a softer relationship with yourself. Dear friends, you do not have to heal everything overnight. You do not have to suddenly become peaceful. Healing is not a race. Peace is not perfection. Even small changes matter. Perhaps tonight, you sleep a little earlier, perhaps tomorrow. You speak more kindly to yourself, perhaps this week. You call someone you miss. Perhaps next time fear rises, you place a hand over your heart and whisper, I have carried enough for today. I deserve peace too, and little by little, the heart softens, the nervous system settles. The body breathes easier, joy quietly returns, not because life became perfect, but because you stopped fighting yourself. Because, dear friends, health is not only about what we eat, it is also about what we carry emotionally. Too much worry becomes heaviness. Too much resentment becomes exhaustion. Too much loneliness becomes sadness. But gentleness heals, compassion heals, connection heals, presence heals, and perhaps most beautifully of all, learning to let go heals. So as we end today, may you be gentler with yourself. May you carry less. May you sleep more peacefully. May you forgive what is ready to be forgiven. May you stop punishing yourself for being human. And may you remember, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are simply moving through another season of life, one breath at a time. If today's message brought even a small sense of comfort, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of healing and mindfulness with us. And if there is something your heart has been quietly carrying, feel free to share it gently in the comments. Sometimes healing begins the moment we stop carrying pain alone. May you be well, may you be peaceful, and may your heart grow lighter with every passing season.